All right. Hello and welcome to AWS Made Easy Ask Us Anything live stream episode number 47. How's everyone doing? How are you, Rahul?
Doing very well. How are you? How was your weekend?
Oh, really good. I wish you were here in Seattle. We had the most incredible, sunny, gorgeous weekend on Saturday. Sunday was back to a little bit dreary and gray, but Saturday was worth it. We had a barbecue, had all the siblings over, and my parents were there, and we just had a great time, just kind of enjoying the sunshine. How about
I
you? How are
totally
you?
know. I totally know. I think so. I got all the photographs of my nephew and my niece in Seattle, all by the beach, and it seemed like amazing weather. Um, but yeah, otherwise over here, well, a busy week. There's been a lot going on the CloudFix side of things. So a little bit of a half working, half relaxing weekend, but totally geared for this week. What's happening?
Yeah, it's a busy. Well, we got a busy program this week.
Yeah,
And
why don't we jump right into it?
sure. Well, we have a few announcements before we get started. Let me present my screen here. Let's see, share screen. Here we go. This I want to share. Sorry, I didn't want to make sure to share the wrong window here. Sometimes there we go. All right. The first announcement we have next weekend or next week we have Meredith Holborn joining us, and she's going to be talking about cloud intelligence dashboards. So this is a link to her talk that she did at the AWS user group in Manchester as a bit of a preview. So that we put that in the comment section. Yeah, so she is based in the UK, and we're going to be having her on to talk about cloud intelligence dashboards. We had a chat with her last week, so we're really excited to have her on. And I'll put a
Yeah,
link
and
to her
just as a
here.
preview for how we want to have the conversation with her is um, we basically told her we want her to break things down to something that's easy and consumable and digestible for the audience so that you don't have to go through tons of decisions to get started with it. So she's going to come in with some really neat insights. The entire team is working on trying to figure out how best to present this stuff to this audience. So we're really looking forward to the conversation next week.
Yeah, absolutely. That's going to be a really fun one. So keep an eye out on whatever channel you're following us, whether you are on LinkedIn, YouTube, Twitch, Twitter. You will see an announcement coming shortly. Another announcement that's fun, and I know, Raul, this is part of what's been keeping you quite busy, is AWS Insiders. I wanted to bring this
That's
up
right.
again. How's that going?
Oh, really well. We have such an amazing season two lined up with such amazing guests. We are just trying to make sure that all the recordings and everything are kind of done so we can publish all of these very, very quickly. But good. I mean, check it out. We just launched a new episode yesterday, I think, or late last night, my time. So you should check it out. This is called AWS Insiders. It's a podcast where we try and bring in the latest debates and conversations about AWS and the cloud. We have some amazing guests on the show. And yeah, check out the conversations with Hilary Doyle, who brings in a completely different perspective of being an entrepreneur. She is the co founder of Wealthy Works Daily. And we have our guests and me. I think we try and bring in some interesting conversations to you.
Well, I'm looking at the lineup of season 2. So the episode that just came out yesterday is how to avoid the pitfalls of IAC, so infrastructure as code. So I guess there's
Yeah.
pitfalls to that. There could be downsides. Nothing just says pure upsides.
No, so here's the core problem, right? Um, Everyone kind of started adopting IAC really quickly and it's become the de facto standard purely because a lot of our deployments are becoming unwieldy and sprawling all over the cloud. And so IAC totally makes sense. And why IAC and why not something else? I mean, as developers, we are most used to code, and code gives us all the power and all the flexibility to do whatever we want in these complex scenarios. But I think the one thing that we don't address is the fact that just like code, there is technical debt, there's FinOps debt associated with that code. And we haven't really gotten to the point where we've started talking about it. So this is a conversation, bringing that out and having that discussion.
I'm reminded of one of our very early episodes. I think it might have been episode 5 when we were talking with Nathan Peck about CDK, and we said, "Well, does CDK encourage good practices or code reusability?" And he basically said, "Well, if you are going to be a sloppy coder, then your infrastructure as code will also be sloppy, and vice versa." And so
Correct.
I'm really looking forward to diving into. I haven't listened to this one yet, so I'm looking forward to hearing it and some fun discussions around that one. So this is available wherever good podcasts are sold. Apple Podcasts,
Correct.
Spotify, except it's free. Google Podcasts, RSS, Spotify. So go have a listen to AWS Insiders. Oh, I've got a fun one. So, in
Great.
addition to needing a haircut, I'm also wearing this hat because of the AWS Community Builders. This is the cool AWS Community Builder swag
That
just
is really
arrived.
awesome.
I'm very happy about that. And as part of that, I met with two of our other community builders, Rob Koch and Suleiman, and uh, we're going to be running the AWS user group in Seattle. So just last week we had an AI ML meetup focused on Bedrock and LLMs, and that was really exciting. And then, yeah, there's more meetings coming up in the future. So if you're based in Seattle, come check that out. They're going to be in the AWS Skills Center, which is a really, really neat place. Look that up as well. It's where you can come in and learn all about AWS. And we're going to be able to have access to that space for the AWS User Group Seattle. So that's exciting. Keep an eye out on our social media for updates and posts about that as well.
Awesome.
And then one other announcement. This was interesting. We just released a blog post on cutting costs in half by right-sizing EC2 instances. I'll put the link to this blog post in the comments. So have a look at this one. We'll be doing a deep dive in this shortly, probably next week or so. Basically, yeah, how do you right-size your AWS EC2 instances? So have a look at this blog
Yeah.
post and then get ready for a good deep dive on that in the coming weeks.
Yep. And trust me, it's not as simple as it seems. There are a lot of things to take into account while you're doing this. And yeah, check out the blog post. This was a real fun one for me to read. So I'm sure you'll enjoy it as well.
Absolutely. Well, I have one quick little news article to do before we jump into the AWS reviews. Do you mind if we do that one,
Great.
Rahul? Let's do
Yeah,
it.
go ahead.
So this one I thought was quite interesting. Microsoft to take on Apple M MacBook with the new ARM chips and Windows 12.
Yeah,
The story, I think they're missing part of the story in this article. So if Microsoft is investing in ARM-based chips, this is not just for devices. What do you think, Rahul?
correct. I do believe that this is also for servers. And I think it's apparent that all the three big cloud players kind of need to get into, I mean, they have been in custom chips for a while, and building their own custom ARM chips seems like the way to go, because just the efficiencies that you get on each core with these ARM processors far beat the Intel and the AMDs, just on the efficiency part of it. And for a vast majority of general purpose workloads, these ARM processors are probably going to be a really good choice in the long run. So it just makes sense for them to do this, not just for the laptops and desktops, which of course are the bread and butter for Microsoft. But if they can get more, they at the end of the day, they are competing with the Apple MacBooks. I don't know whether you heard this, but apparently the Apple MacBook upgrade cycle has gotten delayed by almost 2 years, because the M1 chips themselves are so good even today that people are not upgrading as frequently as they used to. So it just makes a lot of sense for the efficiency and the fact that they're going to have to compete with the M series chips from Apple. They just have to do it. I don't see another way around it.
And it's exciting to know, what you can do when you have a flexible, open server platform like this. Because I think part of what in the article they're talking about building in inference for AI
Yeah.
into these chips, which is going to, obviously that's in the news every single day. So that Microsoft is pretty well positioned there. It's really exciting to see what they can do. Windows 12 would be optimized for AI and silicon chips.
Yeah.
So custom.
Here's another thought on this particular thing. I think today we rely on a lot of the AI inferencing being done on servers, which are in these large data centers. But I think we are gearing up for a time when a bunch of this stuff needs to move to the client side or to the local machines, because you need the very, very low latency. You can't just wait for many multiples of seconds for responses to come back. In a lot of these scenarios, you need instant response. So moving all of that compute to the edge totally makes sense. And so just like the M1 and the M2 chips from Apple, where they have an integrated fabric of the CPU, the inference engines, and the neural computation engines, and so on, all of that is now, you're going to see more and more of that happening at the edge. There's a very interesting article that was published by Andreessen Horowitz about the compute requirements of AI. It's a fascinating read that talks about what it takes to build some of these models. And if you get a chance, take a look at it. We'll see if that's the article.
Navigating the high cost of AI compute. I love this. These a GPU elevated into the sky. If you've ever priced out GPUs lately, this is the rightful position to be in. Yeah, the generative AI
Correct.
boom is compute bound. This is fascinating.
Exactly. So there's a lot of very interesting stuff going on. There is going to be tons of compute that's going to be needed for this stuff. And so it is imperative on the cloud providers to start building custom chips. NVIDIA has built their own, cloud. I think they put it on Azure. Azure is doing their own thing as well. GCP has had their TPUs for a while. I think they'll come up with more or more specific processors or newer generations. And of course, you have the Trainium and the Inferentium on the AWS platform, which I think are now in the second generation. So a lots more to come in this field.
Yep. So keep your eye out on custom silicon. That is a really neat.
Yeah.
And I love in this article. So see here on this, how they generated this art was with the Midjourney Art AI. And in our right sizing EC2 blog post, just as a little preview, right sizing, I referenced the Alice in Wonderland story where she's and she has to grow. And so I put in Midjourney, generate some art of Alice in Wonderland in a server room. That's what I got. It's generative. We are in a really neat period of time with generative AI, and so there's going to be
Absolutely.
more to come on that front as well. All right. Well, let's jump into the first AWS announcement, which is going to be provision capacity on Athena. Here comes our transition, and we'll talk about provision capacity.
Great.
There we go. Announcing provisioned capacity for Amazon Athena. So this happened on the 28th of April, just a couple of days ago. And this is a new feature that allows you to run SQL queries on fully managed, compute capacity for fixed price and no long-term commitments. So provision capacity. This is
Correct.
interesting. We're seeing this similar, price differentiation across different services. Right, just like Dynamo has provision capacity. Now we have Athena provision capacity.
Yeah. So basically, I mean, the challenge of Athena is that sometimes it just gets incredibly slow to return results. And to be honest, I mean, when you have large data lakes, Athena just makes so much sense because everything is SQL. You can query over your data sitting in S3 or other data sources. And it's really neat. But sometimes you need these provision capacities to be able to sustainably rely on Athena to be your primary query engine. And so far, unless you had these long-term commitments, you really couldn't do that. But now that you have provision capacity, you pay a little bit higher, but you're guaranteed compute that will allow a certain level of performance that you require for that to become your default query engine. Now, the alternative to that is taking all of this stuff and figuring out how to move over to either Redshift or Spectrum. But each of those two options is, I think, at least 5 to 10x more expensive.
And if most of your use case is, say, batch jobs, things that have to run periodically but not interactively, it would make
Yeah.
sense to, like I said, it's okay if it's slow. That's fine. You'd rather save the money than save the time. And then if occasionally you need to use this in interactive mode, maybe you can provision some capacity for that time, and then you can have a faster experience without having to have a second platform or a second product that you're using in order to query your database or query your data lake.
Yeah, actually, there's one other case where within large organizations or enterprises, a common pattern is to use QuickSight dashboards for all kinds of internal reporting, and the data sources could be anything from RDS to DynamoDB to S3, and Athena basically acts as your SQL layer in the middle. If you have a lot of people logging in and slicing and dicing the data all the time, you really can't support it with the default Athena, which is why a lot of AWS customers tend to switch over to either Spectrum or Redshift. But that's a much, much more expensive, alternative. So now with provision capacity, you can actually support all of your internal use cases and your internal user base for all those queries that you're running. You don't need to switch over.
Well, and if you're already paying for QuickSight, you want to save money somewhere else. That
That's true.
it's
That is
funny.
true.
The cloud intelligence dashboards that we'll be talking about next week, I think they're QuickSight based, and that was one of the things we're going to talk about there as well, is how to optimize for that cost.
That is correct.
So, what do we give this article? I mean, I really like it's a nice length for a what's new. It it gives you some good background context. Some of the what's news are a few sentences. This can give you some background
Yeah.
context, gives you a list of regions, gives you
Yeah.
links to learn more.
Yeah. Can you go to the managing query processing capacity?
Yeah.
So if you look at this, it explains very clearly what the query processing capacity actually means, how you set it up. There are instructions if you go further down about how you can provision those for yourselves. The considerations, limitations are all in there. So I think it's pretty well laid out. There's not too much complexity to it. So I would give this a 4. So the 4 clouds, and definitely simplifies. If you could stay with Athena and not have to move to Spectrum or Redshift, I think that's a win. That's definitely a win.
That makes sense. Although it's adding a little bit more, well, it's one extra option for Athena, but it's eliminating a whole other service. So it's like
Right.
on a net scale, you are reducing complexity.
Correct.
All right. Well, that's a pretty good one for and it simplifies.
Yeah.
All right. Well, we'll move on to the next one. Before we do that, just wanted to have a quick mention of CloudFix, which of course is Rahul and I's background and where we sponsors the live stream. It's been really fun to be writing the blogs and to appreciate all of the complexity that gets removed from your life when you want to use CloudFix. Right. Um,
Yeah.
just mentioned QuickSight. Right. One of our finder fixtures is to remove idle QuickSight users. That can be expensive. That can add up. And zooming out in terms of the goal of CloudFix in general, we talk about reducing your AWS bill, but what that then empowers, right? That then empowers resources to be spent somewhere else to maintain your headcount, to innovate in other areas of your business, to keep your business going, or to keep your project going, whatever it is, wherever you're using CloudFix. So it's really exciting to be part of. So with that, let's hear
Yeah.
a message from CloudFix, and then we're going to move on to S3, a new default setting.
Public cloud costs going up and your AWS bill growing without the right cost controls? CloudFix saves you 10 to 20% on your AWS bill by focusing on AWS recommended fixes that are 100% safe with zero downtime and zero degradation in performance. The best part? With your approval, CloudFix finds and implements AWS fixes to help you run more efficiently. Visit cloudfix.com for a free savings assessment.
All right. This one, I think, is noteworthy because a default setting is changing. This is a rare unicorn of an announcement, because they don't do that. We're still on GPT-2 as a default setting, on GP2 as a default setting.
Correct.
Yes. So this is a big announcement. What are the security settings that are changing here?
So I'm actually very surprised that they have enabled S3 block public. They've enabled S3 block public access. This one I thought was already on when for the longest time when you create an S3 bucket. I was already under the impression that it blocks all the public access to it by default, and you have to explicitly turn it on. It's been there for a while. I don't know if it was very region specific or it was ad hoc region to region, and they just standardized it and closed all the gaps. But for the longest time in US East 1, if you've created a new bucket, this has always been checked where it disables, or actually unchecked, where public access is not allowed, and access control lists are also disabled for S3.
No, I wonder if that is a console versus an API thing. Was in the console?
That's a good point. That's a good point. In the console, that is definitely true. In the API, the defaults were probably random or undefined so far.
And S3, of course, one of their oldest services. I think S3, EC2, Mechanical Turk, that's like some of the original set of services. So it's neat to see the continuous evolution of S3. So that's neat. And they've got a default setting, access settings for new S3 buckets FAQ. They've got a heads up blog post that you can dive into for more details. Let's have a look at that quickly. So this came in December of 2022. This is a Jeff Barr blog post with an update of a few days ago saying now enables S3 block public access and disables S3 access control lists for all new S3 buckets.
There's actually a third setting also. There are 3 settings I remember in the console that are turned off by default. I need to check what the third one is, and I'll bring it up during one of the breaks. But there used to be 3 different checkboxes I remember in the S3 console. Oh, there you go. Just go up a little bit. There are 4 of them. So there, block all public access. That the first one is ACLs. The first 2 are ACLs. The next one is for objects granted through a new public bucket or access point policies, and then the last one is block public and cross account access. So it was ACLs, cross account access, and objects that were specifically granted policy-based access.
So here is block public access. This came out, 3 years ago. Well, no, 5 years ago now.
Yeah.
This is kind of neat. This is, I guess this is one of those limiting the blast radius type of things where you don't necessarily, I think the default for any data should be private unless specified otherwise.
Yeah, I think this is more than reducing the blast radius. This is just the best practice of starting with the least privilege model and then granting privileges as need be. One of the common mistakes that I see a lot of folks make, especially developers, is when they want access, instead of taking the time to actually figure out what specific access you need, they will open up, they'll create a new policy which has access to all resources, all buckets, and just grant all permissions to a particular IAM role. And that, I think, is a terrible idea. You should take the time to know exactly what access you need on specific objects, specific buckets, and only grant permission to those.
No, I'm certainly guilty of that, right? When you're developing, you don't want to spend time making an IAM policy, so you just end up having keys with your administrator, which are extremely dangerous to have those keys floating around anywhere.
Correct.
And they really shouldn't even exist. But
exactly,
it's so easy when you're developing. Oh, I want to add an Elasticache. I don't have to go modify my IAM policy for this account to take into account this new service. I just want to turn it on and start using it. And this is the places where AWS has facilitated this, like in SAM, there's the direct connect. So you can say, I want this Lambda function to talk to this S3 bucket, and they've kind of made it really easy to generate IAM policies for these very common scenarios. So I really like this general pattern that we're seeing of making it easy to follow these best practices.
I agree. So this one is pretty straightforward. I love the fact that it's now default. Very clearly defining what the defaults are and making sure that they are in the interest of the customer makes total sense. So this one I will give a 4.5. Like, I think some of the simplest things, when executed well, have some of the greatest impact. So this one falls definitely in that bucket.
And then would you say you'd want to see more in this realm, right? More opinionated almost defaults.
Correct. I mean, we've talked about the GP2 to GP3 forever, right? Where the default for EC2 instances is still GP2. I don't know why, because over the last year or so, GP3s have equal or better performance than GP2 under every scenario. And along with that, they are about 20% cheaper. So why would you ever choose a GP2 volume type over GP3? It just doesn't make any sense.
I agree. All right.
So, yeah.
Well, let's move on to the next one, which is going to be a CloudWatch console announcement. So let's hear what is new in CloudWatch. All right, let's put this up on screen. Here it is. CloudWatch adds new console capabilities and data visualizations. So CloudWatch is introducing enhancements to the console experience, which improve data visualizations, cross-console navigation, and user experience. This includes metric graphs, gauge and text widgets, and alarm tagging. You can plot side-by-side graphs with different time ranges. So that's interesting. You can compare how a metric performs over different time periods. That's really good to help give you a baseline, because you might not, there's so many metrics out there. So if you wanted to look at your read IOPS or your write IOPS and you don't know, well, what is high or what is low, you can say, okay, I know that over the last 3 weeks it's been fine, but then over the last 2 days it's been a little bit high. How do you get those numbers at your fingertips? From now you can look at these different time ranges. That's the use case that's coming to my mind. Rahul, how are you processing this one?
Yeah, so I mean, CloudWatch dashboards probably, I mean, the easiest way to look at any of the KPIs around your applications and kind of react to situations with alarms. Totally makes sense. I really wish, so I love this announcement, making it simpler to get started. You don't have to, bring up a quick set dashboard. So let me step back. So earlier we spoke about a simple use case where you had S3, Athena, and QuickSight as your stack, your simplest stack to create visualizations. There's one simpler than that. When you have all of your metrics sitting in CloudWatch, you can just create the CloudWatch dashboards. And if they're simple enough, like you have CPU, memory, typically when you look at the AWS console and look at your EC2 instance, or you look at metrics for any resource, that's a CloudWatch dashboard that kind of pops up or gets embedded within the console. that you get shown. So it's a really easy way to look at a time slice of what's happening with your resources. So absolutely love it. I think it definitely simplifies life for most developers. You don't need to go create all these Athena quick-site dashboards and stuff like that. You can just do it straight in CloudWatch. However, when it comes to this blog post, I really wish, or when it comes to this announcement, I wish they had a blog post accompanying it that at least showcases some of those capabilities. That showcases, a typical use case of how you would use a CloudWatch dashboard instead of running away to go create a quick site, crazy dashboard, or using Grafana or, one of the other tools to showcase what's going on. So, it doesn't have any of the visual elements to it. I went through it, I looked it up.
Yeah, you'd think that for something that's so visual, right? There's so few times where this is visual. It's so rare. Usually it's, hey, look at some JSON.
Yeah.
You can make it as exciting as you can. But for something that's so visual, you'd hope they take the time, right?
I mean, if you take a look at the page for Grafana. If you go to grafana.com, just look at their page. Okay. It kind of entices you to use that as a visualization platform for everything, because you see a bunch of examples, you see what people are doing, you see these cool graphics. It makes you think about things that you would want to do with it. And that's what is enticing. When you read a 6-page, document that just has a bunch of JSON and other stuff stuck in it, I mean, that's the last thing I want to look at for a data visualization tool or for a data visualization announcement.
What would be neat, how Tableau has their data visualization competition? It would be really neat to see, I don't know, scenarios that have been spotted through this new data visualization capability. Right, here's a scenario, well, like the one I just described, where you needed to know your baseline write IOPS, and you couldn't do it before. So here's a little walkthrough, and here's a showcase of using, because it's neat to be able to share, these stories of how we're actually using this stuff. And if there was a place where that was possible, that would be kind of neat.
Yeah, I think that gets a little more complex. Maybe if you had quick site dashboard, there's a lot more widgets and a lot more creativity around it. But the simple stuff to get someone started, I would have loved to see more visual dashboards that at least give people a sense for what they can do with it right out of the box.
Yep, that makes a lot of sense.
So I'm going to give this one a 2.5 for a lost opportunity. This is a simple announcement. They should have taken the time to at least put in an image of a simple dashboard that tells someone what they could do with it. And
And I realized I don't even have it. Well, I don't even have it. No, I've got a 2 and a 3. I'm going to have to make a note to myself here to get a 2.5. So I've just been toggling back and forth. All right, let's do a 2.5 clouds. There we go. All right. It's only because we want the examples, to understand exactly how we can use this. I think the content itself is great. We want the example.
Agreed. It's just we want the bite-sized, consumable information to be presented in these blog posts or in these announcements.
Yeah, absolutely. And this actually reminded me, just on the topic, it reminded me of another announcement we have. We're working on a new blog post series called Foundations, where we want to, for a lot of the different cloud fix finder fixers, the ones that are coming up, we're using the CloudWatch agent, the systems manager SSM agent. And so we're going to have a blog post series that's talking about some of these common things about common bits of infrastructure that you'd want to look at for monitoring and cost optimization. Another one we're working on is how to use the cost and usage report, or the CUR, which is the basis of many of our finders. And you should really know how to use that, right? How to query and inspect your own build at a very, very granular level. You can often find that stuff through other APIs, but it's just so nice to have it in one place.
Correct. I mean, it's like your cost and usage, or it's basically your cost explorer, which works well up to maybe when you have one account. But when you have multiple accounts, all rolling up to a master payer account or an AWS organization, things get very, very complicated. And so when you have to slice and dice the data in different ways to figure out how you're going to do, show back or charge back or any of the other processing or gathering insights about where, what kind of resources are being used where, you really cannot do without Kerr. So Kerr is kind of at the heart of any kind of efficient use of AWS resources generally.
Absolutely. So we're going to have a blog post series that's going to dive into some of these foundational bits. And another one is how to react to a CloudWatch alarm. So CloudWatch can fire off an alarm to an SNS topic. So once you've done your cost optimization and you want to make sure that you're monitoring the resources, well, how do you get alerted if something goes wrong? It's CloudWatch alarms. So CloudWatch alarms will fire off an event to an SNS topic, but then what do you do with that? So we're going to have a foundation blog post about that as well. So keep an eye out for that blog post series in the near future.
And we will be bringing them up on this particular live stream as well. So keep watching.
All right, so let's take another quick break. And then when we come back, we are going to be talking about a really exciting announcement of RDS and some new capabilities there. We'll be right back.
Is your AWS bill going up? CloudFix makes AWS cost savings easy and helps you with your cloud hygiene. Think of CloudFix as the Norton Utilities for AWS. AWS recommends hundreds of new fixes each year to help you run more efficiently and save money. But it's difficult to track all these recommendations and tedious to implement them. Stay on top of AWS recommended savings opportunities and continuously save 25% off your AWS bill. Visit cloudfix.com for a free savings assessment.
All right, here comes RDS. All right, I had to make the music fun for that one. This is an exciting one. RDS now supports M7G and R7G database instances. So this is the Graviton 3 based instances.
That is correct. We've been waiting for these Graviton 3s for a while. And finally, the M's and the R series of processors are out. My thoughts on this. I'm a little confused on two fronts. The first one is, so far across all of these different series of processors, including the Graviton ones, the latest generation of processors invariably is as expensive or cheaper than the previous generation, which means moving up or upgrading to the latest processor just seems like the right thing to do. For the first time, the M7Gs and the R7Gs are slightly more expensive than the M6Gs and the R6Gs. And this then makes the decision about whether to upgrade or not a lot more complicated. Because then you have to care about price performance, then you have to figure out how to measure performance, and then you have to figure out whether you're at the right point in the price performance curve and whether it makes sense for you to move or not. For the most part, people are not going to move. Okay. So that's one part of the dilemma that I have in my head. The second one is that Aurora, which is AWS's native database on RDS, that one is not yet supported on you can have those on the M7Gs and the R7Gs. So that's a bit disappointing because even if you have these new M7Gs and the R7G, migrating your existing database over to this new database is going to be really hard, is my guess. I don't think it's going to be that straightforward.
Now, where did you find the pricing? I'm kind of in a little bit of a loop here. So I'm looking at the RDS pricing page.
Can we bring it up on the screen?
Yep. Oh, yeah. Thank you. So I'm looking at on this blog post. Here's the
go to the EC2 instance pricing, and that'll be indicative of what comes up on RDS as well. So go to the pricing of the M7G and the R7G.
Let's see. So on-demand pricing, instance type. So we'll do M7.
So let's do an M.
Okay, so we've got these here.
Yeah, so take a M7G large, right? It's about 8 cents, a little over 8 cents. And if you look at the M6G,
a little over 8 cents. Run the M6G.large. Oh, it's a little bit cheaper.
7 cents, right?
Yep.
So it's almost 7 to 8% cheaper. The M6 and the R6 are 7 to 8% cheaper than the M7s. So the upgrade is invariably going to be more expensive for customers. And the only reason to actually make that shift is if your price performance totally, makes it worth it.
And then back to the article, they say, okay, well, what's the 27% price performance? But they should have called that out, saying, okay, it's a 27% price performance, but it's a, what is it?
7 to 8%.
7 to 8 price increase.
Yeah, somewhere in the 7 to 8% range. It's a price increase.
So that makes sense if you have good utilization, because if you have poor utilization because your sizes are too big, then you're not going to see any win. It only makes sense if you are at, say, more than 60 or 70% utilization where price performance actually matters.
Yeah, I don't even know exactly where that threshold is. And that's, I think, the whole problem. It's not straightforward to figure out at what point it's worth it. Right? Because then you have to really sit and analyze your workloads to see how long your workloads take. So the price performance makes sense when you want responses to come back, A, faster, and that matters to you. B, when your resource utilization is at its peak, and for whatever reason, if you have better performance, your peak utilization goes down. That's the second one. And it's really hard to judge your database's operational profile to figure out in which bucket this stuff falls and then make a decision on it. It's just too hard.
Well, as part of the CloudFix blog research, I've been writing these little Python programs that will kind of simulate pricing under different scenarios. And I remember one day I was writing one, and then my son came up to me, and he was working on his astronomy work, and we switched gears for a little bit on calculating Schwarzschild radius, and that's about the event horizon of a black hole. And I remember thinking, this calculation's easier.
I think that's the right way to put it.
Yeah.
Some of these calculations are really, really complex and across so many different dimensions that I doubt most people will even attempt to figure out whether it's worth it or not. You're not going to have a lot of people jumping on this.
Which is too bad, because it is a good opportunity, but you have to put in the time and the work in order to kind of convince yourself that it is.
Correct. And an easier way to migrate. And so not only that, again, like I said, this is not available for Aurora. It's available for RDS for MySQL and Postgres and MariaDB, which basically means that you will have to do all the hard work of migrating your database over and making sure that it is consistent, it is working as expected, it scales, all of that stuff. If it was Aurora, we wouldn't have cared. The Aurora migration would have just happened on its own. And I would have thought that they would have managed to get that stuff done first before any of the other RDS instance types or RDS databases.
Well, let's see. They do mention the optimized write support, so that's good. But again, it kind of adds to this feature matrix of what is supported where.
Yeah. I think the decision-making process for customers is incredibly hard given this data? One, it doesn't say that these machines are more expensive. It's not easy to figure out pricing unless you go to the EC2 pricing. It's not there in the RDS one right now. So it just becomes really hard to decipher all of this and make a decision. So I'm going to give this one a 2. I'll wait for the Aurora announcement. I will hope that there's a simple migration path that's very clearly defined. And like it doesn't even cover which versions of MySQL and PostgreSQL will seamlessly move over.
So then I'm curious, does this simplify or complexify?
Actually, wait, I take that back. RDS for MySQL version 8.0.28 and higher, and RDS Postgres 13.4 and higher, they are very clearly mentioned. So I take that back. That's my mistake. I did not read that properly. So that is the migration paths. Actually, the supported ones I mentioned, migration paths are still not clear.
So we're sticking with 2?
Yeah. I still have too many open questions.
So then is this complexity, is this more
complex? I do think this complexifies. Like it doesn't simplify someone's decisions.
We like those ones where it said, okay, this is strictly better, switch today.
Yeah. Or there's a very clearly demarcated operating field in which that decision is absolutely clear. If you remember the GP2 to GP3, right in the beginning, if you had GP2s that were operating with less than 3,000 IOPS, then moving to GP3 was a no-brainer. It got complicated, when you went above 3,000 IOPS initially, when GP3 came out. But up to 3,000 IOPS, it was a no-brainer. So that was definitely, I would call it a simplification. Here, I don't know how to even create a sliver of a decision which is a no-brainer. I just don't know how to do it.
All right. Well, that was surprising, I suppose, in that we're typically very, very, very pro Graviton, but it still has to make. At the end of the day, it has to make our life as developers, as cloud infrastructure managers, as DevOps.
Don't get me wrong. We still love the Gravitons. We still love, all of these servers. I think they are incredible. What I'm specifically rating over here is AWS's narrative for their customers. And I think that is what is confusing.
Absolutely.
It doesn't help them make easy decisions.
Yeah, it has to make it at least give a rule of thumb. So here's a one sentence thing of when it makes sense to switch.
Correct.
All right. Well, with that, let's do our deep dive into duplicate CloudTrail trails. Here it comes. All right. We are going to be talking about CloudTrail trails. Let me pull up the blog post. There we go. Put that on the screen here. Let's see.
Great.
Here we go. I put that.
Now do the other one. I think the other view is better.
Oh yeah, no. When I turn on the special effects, I just want. Yes. Okay. Definitely. All right. Well, let's do this. So here is the blog post, and I will switch over to let's see. It is this view.
Yeah, much better.
Well, actually, I don't need to have this in stream anymore because we've got these fantastic special effects. So we are talking about reducing AWS CloudTrail costs by deduplicating trails. Now, if you are a follower of the blog series, I like to reference old songs when possible. But this one, I kept thinking of the old Roy Rogers song, Happy Trails. It says, who cares about the clouds when we're together? Just sing a happy song and bring the sunny weather. Happy trails to you. So think about that song in the background as you're going. And so I wanted to talk about trails. I like trails. So this is my brother and I on a trail. Let's see. Here is My dad and I up in the mountains.
That's
On
very
Illinois.
nice.
This is a long time. I was
Oh.
a teenager in this photo. And then here
Wow.
is me hiking with a group of friends, and my mom was with us too. So there's some good old fun trail pictures. And so we want to use that as the introduction of CloudTrails. All right, so what are Amazon CloudTrails? I think CloudTrail is a service for monitoring and recording your AWS API calls, and mostly used for compliance purposes. So you want to have an entire record of every API call, and you want to make sure that's stored in an S3 bucket. That is the way that you would use CloudTrail. But you can also use it to kind of recreate, like an audit trail or a forensics trail, understand exactly what happened when you're trying to debug how did your account get to a certain state. You can also use a log of events that way. Now, events are basically API calls that
Correct.
come into your CloudTrail, and there's 3 different types. There's data, management, and insight events. So you can basically think of it as management events are the creation or deletion or modification of resources like S3 buckets, that sort of thing, creating a VPC endpoint. Data events are using those resources, so things like calling a Lambda function or
Or an S3 bucket, or pulling data out of S3,
exactly
or
access.
DynamoDB.
Yeah.
Access.
And then insights are kind of summary statistic level data points.
Yep.
So here, the unit of CloudTrail is a trail. So sprinkled out through the blog post are CloudTrail trails. And that's a trail is like a set of events that you are monitoring, and it's going into all the set of events will then create some log files, which then go into an S3 bucket. And then you can use a trail to analyze, and then maybe you can respond based on that. Like if you're seeing a bunch of API calls of a certain type, you could have an alert. And so that's why you would use CloudTrail trails.
Yep.
So with your trails, it's possible that you could have what we call duplicate CloudTrails. Now, there's a couple. Here's first of all, here's a few sample CloudTrail events that we want to look at. So EC2, you'd have run instances or start instances. Lambda, you'd have create a function or update a function. There's some RDS ones. SQS, create or delete a queue, would be a management event. And then these are all management events. CloudFormation, be creating a stack, updating a stack. S3, creating a bucket. So those are example management events that we want to look for. Now here's the pricing around CloudTrail. For management events, it's $2 for every 100,000 events delivered. And you start to think, okay, that's not expensive at all. It's a really great deal. But as your AWS account gets busier, you can burn through those 100,000 so fast. Rahul, can you give us an estimate of, in a busy, large account, how long 100,000 events takes?
So think of it this way. For every API request that's coming in, okay, or for a simple thing like a data access, you typically, use a multiplication factor of 10 of things that are happening that generate CloudTrail events. Okay, so let's say you made a query to pull some data out of somewhere. That alone, the IAM permissions that you got, the authorization, authentication, with Cognito going through the API gateway, going through making a Lambda call, getting the data out of S3 or whatever other data sources you had, executing that, pulling that data out, and then tracing all of that stuff is tons of events being generated in the process. So this adds up incredibly fast. And blowing through 100,000 events is literally a matter of minutes in a typical account. And with large enterprise accounts, it wouldn't even take a few seconds to cross 100,000 events.
Yeah, this is one of those order of magnitude issues, right? It happens fast. And especially one thing I was read about is that KMS tends to be extremely busy in terms of the events because there's a lot of encrypting and decrypting that happens and updating keys. So this gets busy quickly. Now, the great thing about CloudTrail pricing is that in a region, the first copy of a management event is stored for free. So That's good. We want to see if we can leverage that. And CloudTrail costs, they are an ongoing issue. So I made a link to an Amazon article of why did my CloudTrail cost and usage increase unexpectedly. So we're all about predictability in terms of cost.
Correct.
Predictability is good. Control is good. Unexpected cost explosions, not good. All right. So why do we get duplicate trails? So we have a precise definition of duplicate here. We say a duplicate if they monitor the same set of events. So you can get duplicate because, say, I set up a trail and I'm really interested in, say, compliance to a certain standard. So I'm looking at data on, say, it was S3 and EC2, and I set up a trail to monitor those. But then someone else set up a trail for a different purpose that was also monitoring EC2 and a lot of other things. Well, we'd then be paying for multiple copies of that same management event. And then we miss out on that free tier, which would not be good. So this is where we get duplicate trails or redundant trails where we have, say I have one trail which is set up to only monitor create and delete buckets. But then I have another trail called S3 everything, which is monitoring every S3 event. Well, yeah, all of a sudden I've got this redundancy of I'm storing the exact same event in multiple places.
Correct. And more often than not, it's just because multiple people created different versions of trails on the same resources. And because they wanted it a certain way for their reporting or whatever reason. For example, if I wanted an application and I wanted the cloud trails for my application, I could take the same EC2 resource and the same S3 bucket and the same IAM roles and basically make sure that my trail covers all of those, even though Stephen might have already created one set for his security audit that he's trying to do across the entire account.
And so I guess that brings us to our general principle. Ideally, what you'd like to do, if you could wipe out all your cloud trails and start from scratch, is to have one mega trail that recorded everything, all your management events, and that's free, and then filter them downstream. And you're going to be filtering these events with some data processing language, whether it is
you could just use Athena to do the same thing.
Yeah, you could use Athena. Yeah, you're going to have some where clause in Athena, which is going to filter events. So you're going to be filtering them anyway. So you might as well just have one big pool of CloudTrail events that you've recorded, store the first event for free, and you can just read it in different contexts. But then that requires some coordination, and it just doesn't always happen in practice. So that's why we have this CloudFix fixer to then look after the fact and see what kind of savings can we derive.
Yeah, the one thing to note, particularly about CloudTrail, as against some of the other event data, is that I have not so far come across a single scenario where CloudTrail analysis has to be in real time. Like, it doesn't matter if because it's usually for audit purposes. We want to figure out whether something happened or who got access to something. It's always retrospective in my experience. So in this particular case, having something like S3 Athena and a quick-set dashboard to slice and dice through your CloudTrail logs seems like the best fit stack or the best fit, application.
Well, and especially given what we talked about earlier today, right? Where if you have CloudWatch visuals, that's where what you want for real time is CloudWatch, where you can have CloudWatch alarms and that sort of thing. And now, now you can have visual insights based on CloudWatch. To do that for your real time analysis, have CloudTrail for your post-mortem and passing all your audits.
Correct.
So here's the situations we can get into. There's this partial overlap of trails where we have some of the events are the same, but then each one of them has a unique event. So this one mechanically we can't do much about without breaking something. But here's situations where we can. Say we have two exactly equivalent trails where we're both monitoring S3, all of S3. Well, this is clearly a case where we can optimize. But then we also have this other case where X is a superset of Y, or said other way, Y is a subset of X, where one of them that's where I can say one trail is monitoring create and delete bucket. And then I have another trail called S3 all, which
Yeah.
create and delete bucket are part of it, but so is a lot of other things. So those are the situations we're covering in this Finder Fixer. So again, before we deep dive into all the steps, the easiest way is to use CloudFix. We've already automated this entire thing. And like a lot of, we're going to cover the steps in a 10-minute process. In how much time? In 10 minutes. But there's a lot of details that come into this. And the advantage of using CloudFix is that we've already kind of gone through the hard part, the hard yards of debugging and testing and proving out and kind of working out not just good policies, but good heuristics of when to, good rules of thumb to use to then deduplicate your trails and save on costs while minimizing effects downstream. So
Correct.
use this. The easy way is with CloudFix, but we do this. You can also see our way of thinking. How are we approaching this problem? Because we're transparent. There's no secrets. It's just the automation does it for you. It does it at scale, and it does it effectively and repeatedly. All right. Well, here is the algorithm for finding and fixing trails. Yeah, exactly. This little 5-step process with an embedded 3-step process. So all you do, so say if you have 5 trails, well, you want to list every combination of trails because you can't compare 3 things at once. You have to compare 2 things at once. So you have to list every combination. Then for every combination, you want to say, are they equivalent? Where equivalent in our case means either they're exactly the same or that one is a subset of the other. And then if they're exact or you have that subset superset relationship, then we're going to go through that diagram in white there where there's a few extra things we want to check, a few other rules that, again, we've discovered over doing this many times. And then step 4 and 5 is deactivate. Well, first you want to check, is anyone downstream using this particular trail? Check. And then once you've done that, you can deactivate the trail and stop paying for these events being stored at once. Again, $2 for 100,000. If that's in a large account, you can burn through 100,000 in a matter of minutes or hours. Then you don't want to be bleeding.
It adds up very, very quickly. Let's just put it that way. It could be thousands of dollars every week just to run CloudTrail logs.
Absolutely. Well, step 1, how do you list all the trails? So here's how you do it in Python. You can use the AWS CLI if you wanted to, but for this one, I would use Python because you're going to have to be doing a bit of higher level logic here. So use a more featured language. So you can use the list trails endpoint on the CloudTrail API, and then it will give you a list of trails. Now you want to compare pairs of trails. And so remembering from probability class how many pairs you're going to end up with, you're going to use the binomial coefficient. Yeah. So if you have 10 trails, or if you have this is what you'd use if you're looking at like card probability. So if you wanted to look at how many 5 card hands in a 52 card deck, you would be n equals 52 and k equals 5. So in this case, n equals the number of trails we have and k equals 2. Right, so you plug that all in and you'll get the number of distinct pairs. And this is pairs where the order doesn't matter, right? A to B and B to A, same thing.
Yeah.
So in Python, you're going to want, this is how to do it. You can do it with this list. And note that I'm using typed Python. That's just always good practice to have types, keep your code readable and understandable. Okay, so once you have that, you're going to want a compare trails function, which again, for partial overlap, that's kind of too complicated a case. You're going to have to, you can merge the trails somehow, merge all the sets of events, but that's going to be beyond the scope of this Finder Fixer. If they're equivalent, we can obviously get rid of one of them. Or if you have that y is a subset of x, well, then we can get rid of y and then just filter x to be what y was. So that makes sense. So let's get into how we would then, so once we've compared them and we found that equivalent case or that subset case, so you want to compare them based on the events they're monitoring. And then in the appendix in the blog post, we give a whole set of other properties that you want to use. There's a few other properties about certain types of events that can get included, and you want to make sure that they all match up. you really want to make sure that you're really capturing the exact same set of events, or again, that subset superset relationship. Once you've worked that out, here's the process that we go through. If there's that subset superset one, then you want to deactivate the subset, the smaller one. And before you deactivate it, you want to notify the downstream consumer of it. If someone built a dashboard off of that subset, they're going to have to point it at the new data. If they're exactly the same, then you want to check, is one trail part of a control tower or not? If it's not part of a control tower, then we want to delete the newer one, because logic being, the newer one probably has less stuff depending on it than the older one, all things being equal. But if it is part of a control tower, then delete the one that's not part of a control tower. So control tower is monitoring your event and your account at an organization level, and you don't want to mess with anything there. So if there's one trail that is part of a control tower, keep that one. So here's what we talk about downstream consumers. So say if we have two trails, and they're both, one of them is monitoring this big set of events in trail A, and then the other one's monitoring the smaller set of events in trail B. And they're both going to separate S3 buckets. You're paying for them. They're both going to Athena, and they're making separate dashboards. This is the expensive case. What you want is this. You want to have them all going into one bucket, and then modify that Athena query to filter out what you don't want. So filter to include only, say in this case, it's Lambda and Cognito, which goes into dashboard B, and then all events are feeding to dashboard A. So it's a really straightforward change that you want to make. But you want to make sure to do this before you deactivate the trail. So if you're using CloudFix, it would propose the changes. You then run that by your organization, make sure that no one's downstream of anything you're planning to deactivate. And then finally, you can use the stop logging command to deactivate the trail.
So simple.
Very simple. All right. Well, I thought I'd end this one. This is again, use CloudFix. It's the easy way. It's already automated. And so I asked my dad to find some good pictures of me hiking, and so he sent me some. I thought this is pretty cool. Look what my shirt says. Web service. This is a long time ago. Yeah.
Nice.
All right. Well, that is our deep dive on how to deduplicate CloudTrail. So I hope that was helpful to you, and you can use CloudFix, or you can go through that whole process yourself. But either way, don't want to be paying more than you have to. So that's how you deduplicate CloudTrails. All right. Well, thank you for taking a few extra minutes, but I thought that was worthwhile. And then let's see, next week we've got Meredith Holborn, and that's the Cloud Intelligence Dashboards. Rahul, how's your week looking?
Busy as always, but again, we are planning for all the events coming up. We are going to be in, Toronto for the AWS Summit. So come see us there. I believe the dates for that are 15th and 16th of June. We're going to be in London. That's 7th and 8th of June, if I'm not mistaken. And then we have the FinOps X, which is there at the end of June, 27th, 28th of June, 27, 28, 29, 3 days, right? That's in June as well. And then we have New York, AWS Summit in New York, which is at the end of July. So a very, very busy summer for us, but I couldn't be more excited to be there in person and meet up with all of you. So if you're watching, if you're listening, come. And if you're in either of these locations, please come meet us. We would love to talk to you and get your thoughts.
Absolutely. Please introduce yourself if you're there in person. And then if you're not, just please reach out on here. We're always monitoring the chat. We love your questions, love your feedback. And if you're in Seattle, come check out the AWS users group. And then keep an eye out for AWS Insiders, and keep an eye out for those new blog posts. We're releasing multiple blog posts now with the Foundation series. So have a look at that. And we'll see you next week.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Happy trails to you until we meet again. Happy trails to you. Keep smiling until then. Who cares about the clouds if we're together.
Just sing a song and bring the sunny weather.
Happy trails to you till we meet again.
Is your AWS public cloud bill growing? While most solutions focus on visibility, CloudFix saves you 10 to 20% on your AWS bill by finding and implementing AWS recommended fixes that are 100% safe. There's zero downtime and zero degradation in performance. We've helped organizations save millions of dollars across tens of thousands of AWS instances. Interested in seeing how much money you can save? Visit cloudfix.com to schedule a free assessment and see your yearly savings.